Hey everyone, this is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with Explore.org. Please stand by. In less than a minute, Ranger Naomi Boak will join me and we'll host a live play-by-play broadcast to talk about the bears and salmon we see on camera at Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. We'll be with you in just about a minute. Thanks for joining us today. Well, hello everyone, no matter where you happen to be around the world, no matter what time of the day it happens to be, welcome you to this live play-by-play broadcast brought to you by Explore.org and Katmai National Park. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm a resident naturalist with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger at Brooks River, where we're looking at this titan of a brown bear right now. We'll talk about him, I think, frequently during this broadcast, but I want to introduce my co-host right now, and Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park is joining me to lend her insights on the bear and salmon activity at Brooks River. And Naomi, great to speak with you as always.
Oh, it's great to be here, and as always, fun to watch the bears. And it's September, and we're getting more and more bears back here, so it's great.
Yeah, it's a great time of the year to do some bear watching at Brooks River. September is the second peak season of bear activity at Brooks River. So we're going to try to talk about those dynamics, what bears are doing now compared to what they do in July. We'll go down river from time to time to see bears fishing in this area. So we're going to look at the River Watch camera. And then we're also going to go underwater from time to talk about the salmon activity. So lots of beautiful bright red sockeye salmon still hovering near our underwater camera in the lower Brooks River. Of course, Brooks River is a dynamic place. There's a ton to talk about, but I always do want to take a few minutes at the beginning of our broadcast just to introduce our river and where Katmai National Park is. In case you're unfamiliar with this location, we can go on just a quick tour. Katmai National Park in Brooks River is located about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. And the river itself is about 1.5 miles long. And on this view, it generally flows from left to right. It's bisected by Brooks Falls. And along the river from Brooks Falls downstream, there are several webcams that Explore.org hosts and maintains along with the National Park Service. The signal from those webcams is sent to a radio repeater up on Dumpling Mountain, actually 2 of them, and those signals are sent wirelessly to the small town of King Salmon, about 30 miles away. Back at the river, we'll have access today, again, to the Brooks Falls camera. You can see that located in the star on the left side of the screen. We'll be going to the River Watch camera towards the right side of the screen, looking at the downriver area, and then the underwater camera that's mounted to a piling that supports the floating bridge. I also have a few questions in the queue that we'll try to answer during the broadcast. They were submitted in advance using the Ask Your Bear Camp question form. So if you want to ask myself or any of the rangers a question about bears or salmon or Katmai, you can submit it through that form. You can find the link to that in the featured comment below the live camera feed. Naomi, though, I think it's probably good just to start with the bear that most people are watching right now. There's over 1,000 people watching the webcam, the main Brooks Falls camera, and they're taking in the gigantism of bear 747 here.
Yeah, he's so big. When you're here with bears and you're close to them, you see, and if you're next to a subadult, you say, boy, that's a big bear. I didn't think it was so big. But then there's 747, which is a whole other category of big. He looks to me like he is just about the weight he was last October. I mean, he's looking, don't you think, Mike?
Yes, and a lot of our longtime fans, Bear Camp fans, and longtime Bear Camp viewers, they often kind of joke with me and say, "Oh, Mike's talking about how big 747 is again." But I don't think we can talk about it really enough because he is such a giant. Last year, estimated to be about 1,400 pounds, and yeah, he's comparably big this year. He had, the salmon run last year was really strong. So 747 went into the winter hibernation very fat. He came out of hibernation in really good shape. Naomi, I'm going to bring up the photo that you took of him earlier this year. This is probably at his leanest moment of the year. And there are bears in some ecosystems that don't get this fat before they go into winter hibernation. And this is 747. After he came out of them, he could have been out of the den for 2 months or more when you took this photo. So this is his quote unquote skinny photo, but skinny is like, maybe not the accurate term. It's a lean photo of him, but he's still such a giant bear.
Now compare, I mean, he's so much fatter now. I mean, and there was maybe, a foot between his belly and the ground there. There are only a few inches between his belly and the ground now. And he can even afford to be fussy. He just let that fish go.
That's a little surprising to me because he's been working slightly harder this morning to catch fish. He's doing a lot of standing and waiting for the fish to come to him, but we'll still see him sort of lope upstream in those shallow areas to chase after a fish that he sees. And that's certainly something that we would not have seen him done in July during the peak of the salmon migration, when the salmon were stacked really very thickly against the waterfall, and bears could catch fish extremely easily. So I was hoping maybe I would get an opportunity to see, what type of salmon that was, or if it was a spawned out one, or if it was one that looked fresher. Maybe it was one that had already spawned, and 747 is, he just has so much fat reserves on him now, he doesn't really need to scavenge a lot of those dead fish.
And maybe he's not completely in hyperphagia. Maybe his hormones haven't made that switch yet so that he will eat anything. He's right now sitting in what most people call the conveyor belt, because it is a really great spot for fishing, and it's 747's second favorite spot. Most of the time we see him in the jacuzzi, which is the area right under the lip of the falls where we see so many salmon jumping up. And but this is also a great spot. The other thing I wanted to say about 747 is he is a patient bear. Someone in the falls said to me the other day that there are all these lazy bears. They're not lazy. They're smart. They're patient, and they don't have to move much to catch a few fish and keep them sustained because they're already so fat. But patience does work, and they do get a few fish, and they don't need a lot of fish at this point.
Efficiency is extremely important to a bear because of their summer, in a large part, revolves around preparing for hibernation. That period of time where they go into a den and they don't eat or drink for some bears it'll be 6 months or more of fasting. So they really do practice patience and efficient fishing techniques. 747, as you can see, is skilled at fishing and looking for those opportunities, those salmon that are vulnerable, and he was successful right there. So his patience really pays off. Like you said, Naomi, it's not laziness. It's being efficient. It's being careful with your movements, and making sure that you're not expending extra energy when you don't have to. Bears will do things that does expend energy. They'll play with one another. They'll chase things out of curiosity or fun, whatever it happens to be. But again, in their world, gathering food efficiently is very, very important. And and 747 demonstrates that on a daily basis.
And you'll see a number of bears that do that when you're watching the falls. So think of them as masters of efficiency. Well, there still looks like there's some red flesh on that, so it could be a silver, you think, Mike?
Yeah, a little hard to tell in this light. It's just not very bright at the falls early on this overcast morning there. But since that fish didn't have any really tinge of red side on it, I'd assume that's a coho or a silver salmon, and they arrive in the river in August, so they're fresher than the sockeye salmon, so they contain more calories, digestible calories for the bears. That pink flesh was also a clue that this fish had not spawned yet. The salmon, after they spawn, their flesh is just pale white. It's not that pink fillet that we are accustomed to eating when we get a salmon fillet and put it in and cook it for ourselves.
And notice I think he's eating the whole thing. Looks like it so far.
Certainly, yeah, when a bear's eating the whole fish, that's an indication that he hasn't had that many meals and he has that stomach capacity to spare. So he wasn't doing that earlier in the year, so we're seeing a bit of a change in him. Even though he's carrying a ton of fat reserves, that doesn't mean he's not feeling hunger pangs. So he may be more inclined to eat more of the fish if his catch rate is down. But a silver salmon, I mean, they're sizable fish overall, weighing maybe 8, 12 pounds, sometimes more, and that's several thousand calories of digestible energy for these bears. And so 747 sitting at the falls for hours at a time can easily meet his daily energy demands, his metabolic demands, by eating just like maybe one or two silver salmon. And other than that, after that, it's all just pure profit that he can put that energy into gaining body mass that'll help him to survive winter.
Now, I was noticing just before when we started to zoom in on him that there were some salmon jumping the falls, and usually, see, there we go again. Those are silver at this point. There's some sockeye that I've noticed, but I didn't see that many salmon jumping when I was at the falls this weekend. So that's good to see.
Yeah, the sockeye right now actually are doing a different thing right now. They've pretty much found their spawning site, or they're waiting just to move into a slightly different location to spawn. On our underwater camera, we sometimes will occasionally see some females turning on their sides and fanning the gravel with their tail. That's what they would do if they were digging a nest, but we don't see any real serious nest building typically in this area of the river, down at the river mouth where the bridge is located. Most of these fish that we see on the underwater camera are waiting for the proper time for them to spawn, what their instinct tells them. So they're going to move upstream to the areas below Brooks Falls and several hundred yards downriver in that area to spawn in those really great coarse gravel spawning beds there. So these fish that we see on the underwater camera are unlikely to jump the falls. They're not going to be the ones that we typically see jumping right now. Yeah, a lot of those, like you said, Naomi, are going to be the silver or coho salmon that have come in just a little bit later, and maybe those fish that are looking to spawn upstream. There's going to be a ton of spawning activity happening upstream of Brooks Falls, but those fish have already made it when you're regarding the sockeye. So, and that's happening in the river right now. I think if we could see into the water better right now, Naomi, and maybe you can tell us what you've been able to see from the falls or the Riffles platform over the past few days. But if we could see into right now, I think it'd be we would see it speckled with red fish.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing probably a reasonable example of what's out there on the lower river right now. As I walked over the bridge to work this morning, I could see a lot fewer salmon in the river. I mean, the last few weeks, We've just seen these armies of salmon lined up, waiting for the right moment to go to their spawning sites. And we've seen a lot on the underwater cam. But it was noticeably fewer fish in the lower river this morning. And I also noticed more dead salmon in the lower river, and that's new because they're it was interesting in July when we had so many bears on the lower river. We were seeing injured and dead and dying salmon in the lower river at a greater number than we usually see, and that's probably because of the enormous size of the salmon run. And in the last few weeks, not so many dead and dying salmon, but I'm just beginning to see that now in the lower river. So it's September. It's a time of change.
And just to give everyone a perspective on where our underwater camera is. So again, we're looking underwater at the fish just a few moments ago. The bridge that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, the underwater camera is attached to one of the pilings closer to this side of the river where the Riverwatch camera is attached right now. So that'll just give you a bit of a perspective. And now, Naomi, we can see some of those fish just hovering in the water on a Riverwatch camera. Again, it's a little bit hard to see with the lighting the way it is, but you can look for those dark specks moving around in the water, and those are sockeye salmon that are staging, waiting for the right time to move into different areas to spawn. And the peak of the spawning activity in Brooks River is for sockeye salmon is September. So we have an uncommon duality in a sense at Brooks River. Brooks River offers the opportunity for bears to fish early in the season when the salmon are just arriving, because the number of salmon that use Brooks River as a migration corridor, and especially the falls, gives bears an opportunity to feed on those fish when they first get here. But then after the salmon spawn and begin to die, and they drift downstream and just kind of get hung up in these slow current areas of the lower river, it provides bears with another opportunity to feed. And one of those bears is looking around right now for anything that can't swim away.
Yeah, when I walked across the bridge this morning, a little over an hour ago, there were 7 bears plus a cub in the lower river, and that's a significant increase of the number of bears we've had in the last couple of weeks. So I'm getting very excited. It means that bears are coming back, and there's going to be a lot of great bear watching in the next few weeks.
In this view, the Riverwatch camera we'll see a lot of bear activity on here, over the next several weeks, going into really and through mid-October. Bears in this area will cruise the river looking for anything that can't swim away. They may occasionally try to chase a salmon, but that's not typically their preferred fishing technique, just because the salmon have so many escape routes down here. It's different than at Brooks Falls, where the topography makes the salmon vulnerable. Downstream near the river mouth, salmon have a lot of places to escape bears that are pursuing them, and bears know this. So we're less likely to see bears chasing fish through the water, more likely to see bears looking for those dead and dying salmon laying on the bottom of the river.
I suspect that bear wasn't running after fish, but running away from another bear.
That's I think a good possibility. We can't really see the whole perspective on the river just in our view right now. But often, if you see a bear sort of just like all of a sudden run and just keep on going, it could be that it was spooked by another bear and just wanted to give that other bear space. And that's how most of the interactions between bears end up resolving themselves. One bear just avoids the approach of another bear.
Yeah, they don't really want to fight. They want to eat.
7 for 7 with catch number 2 for our our hour-long broadcast here. So if you're keeping score at home, again, if he's catching silver salmon, we can at least presume that each one of those silvers, or coho salmon as they're called in some parts of North America, it contain maybe 5, 6, 7,000 calories apiece. So just in these two fish, 747 could easily be taking in 10,000 calories, and that's within 20 minutes.
So it's good to see these silvers come through. Mike, is this a little late, or is this typical for when silvers come through the Brooks River?
Yeah, this is fairly typical, within my experience at least, in this watershed. From what I've been able to read, there are far fewer silver salmon moving into the Naknek River watershed than there are sockeye. So still, sockeye outnumber all the other salmon species that utilize the Naknek River watershed. But yeah, so it's not uncommon to see silver salmon continuing to try to move up and beyond Brooks Falls into mid-September, sometimes a little bit later. And we'll still see bears fishing for some of these fresher fish that are trying to find their spawning site up in the falls into October as well.
So, Mike, I have a question for you. Oh, then this looks like a really fresh fish again. A question for you about big bears like 747 and 856 and 32 chunk. Do they need a significantly greater amount of fat to sustain their large frames? So so relatively to their size, and they look so huge, but do they need that extra bulk because of their large frames?
They certainly, for a bear like 747 to be able to support his metabolic demands, he has to be able to catch and eat a high amount of highly digestible food. So the bigger the bear, the higher proportion of meat really you need in your diet. Bears in other ecosystems that are making their living more on plant matter, their overall maximum body size is smaller than what we have here in Katmai. You're not going to find a 1,400-pound bear, for instance, in the northern Rockies, because those bears are gaining almost all of their yearly calories from plant matter instead of meat. And it's kind of like the reverse here, where 2/3 of a bear's diet in Katmai and assimilated calories each year are going to be salmon. So yeah, a big bear like 747 needs a high amount of digestible protein and fat in his diet. He also needs sugar as well, and other macronutrients. So he'll be able to find those by eating berries. But if you're a smaller bear, it's a lot easier for you to make a living on plants. You can digest those foods just as efficiently as a big bear, but your overall metabolic needs aren't as great. So even though you might not be getting as many calories per pound out of a pound of berries as opposed to a pound of salmon flesh, your overall smaller body size is a bit of an advantage for you.
So that's why I assume that those adults we see who are not as overwhelmingly fat as these big guys are able to do just fine over the winter. Although I must say the subadults I've been seeing around have very large bottoms.
Yeah, that's true. We haven't seen any subadult bears on the broadcast today. It's a little bit surprising. There were some seen on the cameras earlier today. Our camera operators are looking around, not only looking at 747, looking at different views downstream to try to find bears for us there. There was a question, Naomi, though, that came up in our Bear Camp question form. Mary Wallace was asking, about those subadults, and they don't get as fat as adults. So how do they survive the winter okay? When we look at a bear like 747, 747 sets the curve. Do not look at him and think that he's the average bear, because not all bears can achieve his level of giant body size and that level of body mass. So bears in most other ecosystems are dealing with food resources that are not only harder to acquire, but less energetic than what 747 has available to him. So he sets the curve in that sense. Subadult bears, their body size overall is smaller, so they can't carry the huge amount of fat reserves that 747 can, but they can do quite well on the foods that they acquire. They can make like I said before, they can make a living a lot easier on plant matter. And what we see with our younger bears, our smaller bears in Katmai, is probably what a lot of other bears and other ecosystems look like before they go into hibernation. So 747 is, again, he sets the curve. He's on a different scale than a lot of these other bears.
And he just caught another fish. So also it might be of interest to you who follow the camps and who followed some of our social media last year. Our survey team comes out here with laser scans towards the end of the season to scan some of our historic buildings and some sites. They are coming out again this September and are going to attempt to scan the same bears that they scanned last year and potentially some more, if we can ever see them out of the water not fishing. So the way we were able to estimate the size of 747 and bear 151, we're hoping we can do that again this year and measure their volume and estimate their volume and weight. So that's another exciting thing to look forward to.
Yeah, I am looking forward to those results. I think it'll be fascinating to get a somewhat of an accurate estimate on the overall size of these bears. Last year really was the first time that I can recall ever that we had any estimate on the size, accurate estimate of the size of the large adults that fish at Brooks Falls. To get those estimates, typically you have to tranquilize the bear and weigh them. That there's risk to the bear, there's risk to the people that do that, and unless there's a really strong scientific need, then biologists for the National Park Service don't do that sort of thing. So it'll be fascinating this year. But here's a younger bear, Naomi, much smaller than the one we're seeing up at Brooks Falls. And this is one of our many subadult bears or juvenile bears that we see on the river. I don't think we've defined that term for our audience, though. Naomi, do you want to talk about what a subadult is?
Sure. A subadult is a young, independent bear. It's been emancipated from its mom. Mom has said, enough, I've taken care of you, you're out on your own. And so that generally happens after the second season, after that yearling season. Sometimes it happens a year later. Bear 94 has kept her 3 cubs with her for an additional season. And then they are juvenile subadults until they mature around age 5. So very interesting to see, watch these bears learn how to live and learn how to make a living successfully, how they learn how to interact with other bears, how they play fight, which gives them experience on how to actually protect themselves and fight in the future. And what I'm finding very interesting to watch this year is to watch some of the young adults, like Bear 812, who is just become a young adult, and he's starting to be a little more possessive about his fishing grounds, a little less friendly with other bears. Now, bears are individuals and they have different social habits, but I love watching how these bears change and develop as they age, and subadults are always interesting to watch. I can't identify who's who most of the time, but their behaviors are great.
They do show us and tell us a lot of different and fascinating stories about the bear world and about how to make a living when you're a young bear that faces a lot of competition and conflict and uncertainty. And this bear here is not very big, so this is and it's hard to tell how big it is without something to for scale. But when you're walking through that grass the grass isn't that tall along the banks of the lower river. So I mean, this bear might be just 3 feet high at the shoulder, or 2.5 feet high at the shoulder, 3 feet high at the shoulder, which is not small, but small compared to 747 for sure. So this bear faces a lot of uncertainty in its life. It's just trying to establish its home range overall, trying to make a living in the world, trying to remember as many lessons that its mother taught it. And they do change, like you said, Naomi, throughout throughout this maturation process. They may be very social when they're young and prefer the company of other bears, and they may have play fight partners that they go to frequently and hang around with frequently. But as they age, they become less and less inclined to play, and they show less tolerance for other bears. So these young bears that we see on the cameras right now that are hovering on the fringes of the river, relegated to some of the less productive fishing spots at the falls, they're going to be the big bears that we see fishing up at the falls in the future. They're going to be the bears like 747. And perhaps, like you mentioned, 812, and it's hard for me to tell, but this might be him in the jacuzzi right now.
Could be. I'm not going to swear to it.
Yeah, it's not fishing. It's not fishing in the exact style of 812 in the jacuzzi, so I'm going to probably say it's not. I didn't see this bear enter the jacuzzi. I don't know if there's any other field marks that will help us to identify it. But it doesn't quite look large enough for number 812.
Yeah, it doesn't seem happy in the jacuzzi either, and it's a little different shaped head, I think. So this is a lovely bear. We know not who.
And we're about halfway through our broadcast right now. So if you're tuning in just a little bit late, we'll take this opportunity to reintroduce ourselves. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm a former park ranger at Katmai National Park in Alaska, but now I work for Explore.org as the resident naturalist, and I'm very thankful for Explore.org to give me this opportunity to continue to share my knowledge and love of Brooks River with everybody. And joining me today is Park Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park.
And also joining us are our stellar volunteer camera operators who are giving us these wonderful views and letting Mike and me know when they spot something interesting. And Explorer's Bear Cam would not be what they are without these volunteer camera operators. So applause for them.
Yes, thanks as always to our camera operators, the unsung heroes of the bear cams. Our bear here, Naomi, was in the jacuzzi for a little bit, testing that spot out, but has quickly moved on. Not all bears show the patience of 747, and often we see 747 if he moves into the jacuzzi. If he somehow determines that it might not be a successful place for him to fish, then he'll move on to a different spot. So we see bears frequently moving from place to place, trying their luck and their skill in a variety of places. Each bear has its own suite of preferred fishing spots and preferred fishing techniques that it will utilize when it tries to make a living.
And I also I'm assuming that what I'm seeing with this younger bear is it looks up every once in a while, and I'm assuming it's keeping an eye on 747, because a bear this size is very unlikely to challenge 747 and his fishing spot. And 747 lately has been showing his dominance to those that are around, since 856, who is more dominant than him, is not around. But 747 a few times has abandoned his fishing spot to move other bears away. So it'd be interesting to see how close the smaller bear ever comes to 747.
Yeah, 747 is certainly aware of the presence of that other bear. The other bear is paying attention to the presence of 747 and his movements. If you're a smaller bear, you do really need to pay attention to what the larger bears are doing, because they pose a significant physical threat to you. So that bear is going to try to maintain, a safe social distance from 747 as best it can. And 747, was aware of the other bear, but we could see that he wasn't paying much attention to what that other bear was doing. And that's a sign of confidence. That's a sign of dominance. When a bear can afford to be relaxed in the presence of another bear, that generally indicates, for a bear like 747, that he's more dominant than the other one and doesn't need to worry about being displaced from a fishing spot.
I love when 747 is in this spot in the conveyor belt, because we really get to watch him and see his mass. Because when he's in the jacuzzi, most of his body is hidden. And when you're on the falls platform, you can see just how massive his head is. But it's really hard to make that judgment on the cams. So I enjoy watching him on that conveyor belt, and our young bear has returned to the jacuzzi.
And the jacuzzi is a difficult place to fish unless you're a really big bear like 747. 747 can hold his ground easily against the force of the water because he's so massive. Smaller bears have a more difficult time doing that. They often don't know how to fish the jacuzzi very well either. So we'll see them move into different places in the jacuzzi, try different techniques until they sort of figure it out. It seems like the most efficient way to do it and the most successful way to fish in the jacuzzi is just to kind of sit right on the downstream side of it, right where the foam sort of wells up, or where the water wells up from the plunge pool, because we don't really see bears trying to fish we don't see bears being successful in any other spot at the jacuzzi, except for right there. So if that bear moved just a little bit closer towards us, or towards the camera right now, he'd be in that. Right about there is that ideal spot where bears like 747, Otis, 856, and Chunk tend to find the most success.
Mike, you can talk about your own experience in the jacuzzi.
Yeah, Naomi, I have been in there a couple of times. Of course, during a season when bears aren't frequenting the falls, so I wouldn't go and do it now, even if it was permitted. It would be, of course, a very bad idea. But yeah, early in the or late in late spring, like middle springtime, late spring, right around June 1. There's often not many bears in the Brooks River area. The salmon haven't arrived. Bears might pass through, but they don't tend to stick around. So sometimes there can be opportunities to go explore different parts of the river from a bear's perspective that you wouldn't have that opportunity right now. And I've been in the jacuzzi a few times to check it out, and the water is very strong there. It was hard for me to stand where this bear is right now because the force of the water really wanted to shove me away. I once crawled along sort of like the edge of the waterfall right to the top of the jacuzzi where the water comes in, and I sort of I didn't jump in, but I sort of let go of the edge of the water and slipped in, and I was tumbled around in there like a rag in a washing machine. I was probably only in there for like 2 seconds, but it really felt like 10 seconds, like I was getting tumbled around. It was very disorienting to be in there. So it's hard to hold your ground in there, and it honestly gave me a greater respect for the power and the strength of the fish who navigate those currents and have to jump the falls.
Which gives you a kind of indication why that smaller bear is having such a difficult time finding a suitable place to fish there, and is moving around because it just doesn't seem to have the mass to be in there.
while this bear, continues to search the falls area for salmon, looking for different fishing opportunities, we haven't gone underwater in a while, so we'll take a look at our underwater camera here. There's been one salmon, one female sockeye, to be more specific, hovering in front of our camera much of the morning. With great visibility on the underwater camera today, but it wasn't like that earlier this week. The underwater camera, the view was very cloudy, and it was difficult to see. The fish were still there. And Naomi, we actually got several questions from people wondering about the visibility on the underwater camera. Can you explain why the visibility was so poor this weekend, or earlier this week, I should say?
It wasn't because I wasn't cleaning the underwater camera. It was, we had a major storm come through this weekend with 30 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour gusts. The water was really churning up. So that gravel and dust you see there was being churned up along the river, heavy rains and large winds for about 3 days. So that's subsided. Now it's just cloudy and light rain, so we can see again. Here comes a male. They're so striking.
These are really beautiful fish.
Yeah. And I sometimes, in the last few weeks, when there haven't been a lot of bears around, I can stand on the bridge and watch the fish for such a long time, because not only are they beautiful, but you're watching their pre-spawning behaviors. Some of the females are using their tails to dig, and it's not necessarily where they're going to spawn, but you see the males getting a little competitive. I've seen some of the sockeye push trout away, push them away, and I don't recall seeing that as much earlier in the season. So it's the salmon are the reason. They're the reason we're here, and they're at this point in the season really incredibly interesting to watch.
They are the reason for the season. The calendar, I think, of Bristol Bay and Katmai revolves around salmon. It's certainly, we have our own calendars where we mark the months and days off. But yeah, I mean, the true season revolves around salmon. And this year in the Naknek River watershed, more than 4 million salmon returned. It was a record year for the fish. There's never during the last 50 years, in reliable records, going back for any reliable records that we have for Bristol Bay and the Naknek River, there's never been a run of fish in the Naknek River as strong as this year. So really special thing to see this year. The fish that have journeyed to Brooks River swam about 60 miles to get from the ocean, from Bristol Bay and saltwater and tidewater to Brooks River. This is just a little bit of a map of where they're going. The squiggly line at the beginning is Naknek River. Then they travel about 30 miles through Naknek Lake to get to Brooks River. And a lot of these fish that we're seeing on the underwater camera, and all of the sockeye really, have been in the river since July, and they haven't eaten since that time. So they display a remarkable amount of endurance and strength to be able to persevere this long. And these fish down here haven't spawned yet. So some of the hardest work that in their lives, the most important work in their lives, is really yet to come.
I sort of think of salmon and bears as a really good matchup, because they're both extraordinarily resilient and have adapted in amazing ways to their environments and the lives that they have to lead. It's a interesting comparison to me, two very, very interesting life cycles.
we talk about, of course, the competition amongst bears for fishing spots or mating opportunities frequently. But yeah, salmon, I mean, undergo a tremendous amount of competition and risk to complete their life cycle. These are the last of the survivors of the billions of salmon eggs that are laid in Katmai National Park each year. There are, just a few million adult salmon that return, and most of those are caught in the fishery out in Bristol Bay before they have the opportunity to get back into fresh water. And that fishery is managed sustainably. I want to make sure that everyone understands that clearly. The communities in Bristol Bay and the state of Alaska and the organizations that manage the fishery through the state of Alaska manage that fishery very, very well. But yeah, these are the last of the survivors, and they've overcome tremendous odds, and they needed a little bit of luck to get here too, or sometimes a lot of luck in many cases. But it's amazing to see these fish return each and every year to complete their life cycle and fully commit to the spawning process. I mean, their commitment to spawning is absolute. And they'll die after this, so there's no return to the ocean for them. This is, all their cards are laid on the table right now. Everything that they're doing is leading towards that one effort to spawn.
So Mike, we're going to go back to the falls. I have another salmon question.
Well, just 747 here with another catch. Our camera panned away from 747 for a little bit, looking for another bear. So we're not sure how many fish 747 has caught during this broadcast, but this is at least 3 or 4 that I have seen during the broadcast. So he's making a really good living so far this morning.
And he's got that place to himself.
No competition for 747 at the falls this morning, so he can enjoy some peace and quiet there, just do his thing. We can expect the falls area to be a little bit more crowded as we progress throughout the rest of the month of September. When more larger adult males return from some of the fishing, some of the smaller salmon streams that they go to in August. So we can expect to see some of 747's rivals here, like 856, for instance, like number 32, Chunk, who is subordinate to 747 but comparable in size. And then we're also, still looking for the return of maybe number 68. We didn't see him this July, but he displaced 747 in July 2019. So if he comes back in September, it'll be interesting to see how those two bears interact with one another.
And we're also seeing a glaucous wing gull, otherwise known as owls by cam viewers. So many of you give the bears nicknames, and all glaucous wing gulls are called Alice by you. So it's another thing that we notice is fewer gulls around when there are fewer bears, because they are scavengers, and they are looking for those pieces of salmon that the bears leave behind. So in the beginning of the season, you see everything you see more of. The salmons return, and there are lots of salmon, and then the bears come, and there are lots of bears, and there are lots of glaucous wing gulls because they know it's mealtime. So this time of year, there's only one in frame that we can see waiting for 747 scraps.
Bears facilitate access to salmon for many, many other species. The scavengers that we can see, like gulls, ravens, magpies, even eagles. A full-grown sockeye salmon is a pretty tough catch for a bald eagle. That it can weigh as much. The salmon can weigh as much or more as a bald eagle, so a bald eagle can have a hard time carrying a full-size sockeye salmon away. But the carcasses are great foods for these other species. And if a salmon carcass is drug onto the bank by a bear and it's not fully consumed, that's quickly the carcass is quickly colonized by fly maggots. I've seen songbirds like white-crowned sparrows come down to those old salmon carcasses and pick the fly maggots off to feed to their offspring. So bears are helping other species make a living. A gull like this one that was standing downstream of 747 right now would really have to wait at Brooks River until September for the salmon to spawn and die and wash up along the stream bank before it could feed on the fish in the absence of bears. But when bears are around, they feed on salmon from July all the way through the end of October.
Question, Mike. So this time of year,
Sure.
I've been noticing a number of bears eating a lot of grass and eating a lot of berries, and you see berries in their scat. You see the low-lying cranberries, very bright in their scat. Do the birds scavenge from those berries from the scat at all?
I don't know. I don't think so. At least I haven't seen it when I've been standing, for hours and hours on the wildlife viewing platforms. I have seen magpies, though. Sometimes a bear will pass a tapeworm in through its scat, and the tapeworm will be there in a pile of scat, and sometimes the magpies will pick that tapeworm out of there. But I don't think the birds are going to target anything that happens to be in the bear scat, unless it's something like really maybe worthwhile for them, such as a tapeworm. But that's a pretty rare thing. It's not like magpies go following around bears looking for to pick stuff out of their scrap. Magpies are following bears to look for the stuff that they hadn't eaten.
I have noticed a number of magpies have returned. It was noticeable to me that there were very few magpies all season. I think I saw the first ones a few weeks ago, but I saw a number of magpies on the Lower River this week. So they're anticipating something.
This is certainly the season of plenty for not only bears, but so many other animals, the gulls, the magpies, the fish in the stream that feed on salmon eggs, like trout and char. I mean, their stomachs right now are going to be visibly distended with salmon eggs at this time of the year. And this is really like one of their last good meals to sustain them throughout the winter. There's not a lot of food available for trout in these ecosystems in the wintertime. So salmon eggs are an extremely important part of their diet. And a good look here from our River Watch camera, looking straight down on sockeye salmon that are hovering in the water. Some of the fish look a bit more worn than the one we had been looking at on the underwater camera earlier. We can see some scarring on those. That was a fish that was maybe upstream competing for fishing spots. The female right here, Naomi, that we're looking at on the underwater camera, she doesn't really seem to have any of those marks or worn places on her body that would indicate that she has been doing a lot of nest digging or fighting for fishing spots.
It's interesting. Another ranger and I were talking about how few salmon with injuries we saw coming through, meaning fungus growing on them. We saw injured salmon coming back downstream because there were so many salmon this year, but not so many salmon with fungus on them. And that may be something to do with the number of salmon in the run, that so many were able to get through Bristol Bay without running into nets. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think we'll probably see, not only on the underwater camera or on the River Watch camera, but just in general, we might see a greater proportion of salmon with fungus growing on them later this month. Because right now the salmon aren't focused on healing their bodies either. We talk about the amount of energy that they expend in order to migrate upstream and spawn. But once they get an injury, they don't tend to heal at this time of the year because, again, all of their effort is focused on spawning. So when you can put energy into your eggs or your milk or defending a spawning site, and you're going to die anyway, there's not really any need to try to heal infections. So I think we'll probably see a greater number of fish with those more conspicuous infections coming up later this month. But I'm not sure why you might be seeing a little less right now.
We have to thank this female salmon for hanging out by the camera.
Yeah, just giving us a great view. If you tuned into the webcams earlier this year, you saw that the salmon looked really nothing like this. They were bright and silver colored. They really lacked any color except for silver. But the pigments in their flesh over this time, as they matured into fully mature adults, sexually reproductive adults, the pigments in their skin were flushed, the pigments in their flesh were flushed into their bloodstream and then transferred to their eggs, and then also into their skin to give them those bright red colors that are what we would consider to be a classic looking sockeye salmon. But when they're caught in the ocean, they look nothing like this at all. They really lack any sort of bright, broad colors. And that helps to camouflage them in the sea. But on their spawning grounds, you want to look bright and bold in this sense. That's maybe a nuptial signal in a way. It signals to the other fish that you're ready to spawn. Naomi, throughout this broadcast, we've been focusing a lot on salmon. We focused a lot on 747. He's been like the one. Those two things have been like the one consistent, or two consistent aspects of our discussion today. We only have a few more minutes left before we sign off. But what can people look forward to seeing on BearCam the rest of this month? This is our first play-by-play broadcast that we'll be hosting this month. But what can people expect to see going forward into the beginning of October?
Well, I'm just going to comment that 747, before that, 747 got another fish. So we can expect to see more bears returning to the river. I think that we'll see the big guys, the competitors to 747, like 856. Chunk was around the other day. This morning, I saw 7 bears and a cub in the lower river. That's a much larger number than I've seen in the past couple of weeks. I think that with fewer fish at the falls, you'll see more jostling for position. More experimentation by younger bears for different fishing spots. We've already seen some of that. And we'll begin to see males down in the lower river when not chasing females. Most of the time this year when we've seen males on the lower river, they've been there pursuing females. But bears like Otis, he frequents the lower river in September and October. So it's a whole new ball game, and you're going to have a lot harder time identifying bears because they're now in their winter coats. They've changed colors. They look so different. Last year, Divot came as a fluffy blonde and came back as a short-coated brunette. 909 in the beginning of the season had these big ears and a slim body, and now she has the body shape of her mother bead nose. Looks like a completely different bear. So very, very exciting time of year here.
A lot to look forward to over the next several weeks on BearCam. Bears like 747, are definitely going to keep on getting fatter. It's a season of change. We're going to see so many different things, like you mentioned, Naomi. This is, I think, 747's maybe fifth, if I kept track correctly in my mind, fifth salmon of just the last hour. So taking in tens of thousands of calories, working on his figure, he is already well prepared to survive winter hibernation and come out of the spring in good health to compete for those mating opportunities in late spring and early summer. So successful bear right here. Naomi, thanks for joining me on this broadcast. Again, it was always great to hear your perspective.
Oh, my pleasure. A lot of fun.
And thanks to Explore.org and the National Park Service for providing this opportunity for everybody. Thanks to our camera operators for following the bears and giving us these great views today. And my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. We'll be back online for more live broadcasts throughout the rest of the month. So please join us for those. Have a great day, and I hope you're well during these challenging times.